In this devotional, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts from Psalm 9, verses 17 through 20, where I'll answer the question, does God judge nations? Psalm 9, verses 17 through 20 says, "The wicked shall return to Sheol, all the nations that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are but men." One of the problems with having power or authority or influence is that so very often it's easy to forget that all power, authority, and influence finds its root somewhere. And for us in this world, we recognize that all power, authority, influence is rooted ultimately in God, our Creator. This is something that David brings to mind at the end of Psalm 9. Where at the beginning, he was emphasizing our need to glorify God. Here at the end, he points out that so very often people forget that it is God and not man who has ultimate authority in the world. With this in mind, here are 3 thoughts from Psalm 9, verses 17 through 20. Thought number 1, forgetting God. One of the challenges that people in authority have is it's so very easy to forget that God is ultimately in control over creation. When you have some influence, when you have some power, when you have some authority, you start to think that you're able to control things in a way that you really probably can't. And this is quite difficult for folks to wrap their minds around and to continually apply to their lives. What happens is that the nations forget God. When the nations forget God because they've been influential, because they've been powerful, because they've been successful in the world, when they forget God, ultimately God makes his power, authority, control known. The way he does this is through his judgment. And when the Lord judges a nation, it goes from being significant, powerful, influential, to being nothing. We see this play out repeatedly in the text of Scripture, whether it's Israel or one of its enemies. When the nations forget God, God brings them low. Thought number 2, oppressing the poor. This is something that happens when people groups forget God. They begin to oppress the poor. One of the reasons for this is because the poor are more easily oppressed than the wealthy. Another reason why it happens is because people like to exhibit and demonstrate their power over others. They like to do this because it makes them feel powerful. It lets them demonstrate, hey, I've got some oomph. I've got some juice. There's something behind the things that I'm saying. When nations oppress the poor, ultimately the Lord will bring about his judgment upon that nation. This is another one of those things that we see repeatedly throughout the text of Scripture. The oppression of the poor is something that the Lord detests. And if you want to bring on the judgment of God, one of the ways to do that, and to do it more quickly than some others, is to oppress the poor. Because the Lord cares for the poor, and so should the nations. Thought number 3, men, not God. It's important for us to remember that we are men and not God. And this becomes increasingly difficult the more influence, power, and authority you gain. It's hard to keep your perspective in line with reality. Because if you have so many people around you who are just waiting to do the things that you say, who are just looking to you for wisdom, for instruction, then it's oh so easy to forget that there is an authority over you too. But we must remember and continually remember, both as individuals and as a culture, as a society, as a nation, that we are but men. and not God. That we answer to a higher authority, and that higher authority ultimately will judge us. He will judge us nationally and also individually. And this is something that we should take care to remember. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Psalms 9 through 11. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.